So I'm here today to talk about preparedness for older adults. So we recognize that as we age, some of our needs are a little bit different than when we were younger. And our capabilities and our the resources that we have access to may change. So let's talk a little bit about the sorts of things that we need to prepare for, especially living here in Holliston, in Massachusetts, in New England. So what are the sorts of emergencies that happen in our area? Raise your hand, I will call on you, and then I will repeat your answer. I see that hand.
Black ice.
Yes, so black ice, absolutely. So I'll include that in a category of winter weather. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can prepare for winter weather. And again, as the head of the fire department, and I'm also the emergency management director in town, we operate the ambulance at the fire department. And so black ice is a concern, both for when folks are driving as for when people are walking, and something as simple as just going out to grab the paper or get the mail from the post office box can be an issue. So winter weather is one category of things that we need to prepare for. How about other types of situations that can happen? Natural or man-made, so you don't need to be restricted necessarily just to weather stuff.
If you fall. Fire.
Fire, yes. Fire is absolutely a problem. We don't normally think of fire necessarily in this area as a big concern. Here in Holliston, we're a fairly safe community as it relates to fires. We do probably 2 to 4 structure fires a year, probably 9 to 12 brush fires a year. So fire isn't something that we think of like the 1970s in Lynn or Lawrence, where entire blocks were going up, being consumed by flames. However, fire is a concern. So we'll talk a little bit about how to prepare ourselves for fires. You had an answer.
Yes, the person who falls.
Yes, fall. I've done an entire separate program on fall prevention here before. We can talk a little bit about falls, and I know that you have an assistive device with you here today, because
Mobility issues.
yes. So we do want to make sure that we use the tools that are available to us. Did you have your hand? Yes.
Power outages, falling trees.
Yes. So one of the challenges of our electrical infrastructure here in town is that most of our power supply comes through overhead lines, which is a challenge when trees and branches come down. And sometimes that can be from an anticipated event, such as winter weather or an early storm. Several years ago when we had the snowstorm in October and there were still a lot of leaves on the trees, and so when the leaves on the trees then had the accretion of ice and snow, then that brought branches down, which caused issues with the overhead lines. So that's an anticipated event, and even most of winter we are aware of the fact that we could lose our electricity. But sometimes you can lose electricity from an unknown event, a no-notice event, such as when somebody runs their vehicle into a utility pole and power goes out in a specific neighborhood. So that may not be a town-wide issue, but that may be more localized. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about electrical. Other types of emergencies, so we've talked snow and ice in winter, we've talked electricity, we've talked fire.
Hurricanes and tornadoes.
Hurricanes and tornadoes, absolutely. There is definitely the statistical likelihood that we will have another impactful hurricane in this region in the coming years. We've had several that have skirted the coast and gone from being hurricanes to tropical storms to tropical depressions by the time they got up to New England. But I was on a call with the National Hurricane Center last week, and they were predicting a busier than normal season this year. So that's a nationwide prognosis that they were issuing. That wasn't limited just to New England, but they are expecting both for Atlantic and for Pacific storms that there will possibly be some more events this year. So Hurricanes and earthquakes fall in the category, again, of weather emergencies, but then they can cause some of those other challenges that we've already talked about. Hurricanes and earthquakes can cause power outages. They can also cause fires, because if certain things are disrupted in terms of our infrastructure, whether it's a gas pipeline or whether, again, it's electrical, and that comes down, that can then cause a fire. We saw up in the Lawrence, North Andover region a couple years ago, middle of September, when they had the problem with the gas lines that were overpressurized that then caused more than 36 fires. So when there are things that happen underground, that can impact things above the ground. So yes, more natural disasters, earthquake and hurricanes. So something else that I'm surprised hasn't been mentioned.
Carbon monoxide?
Okay, so yeah, carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide is the byproduct of incomplete combustion. So that can be caused by a number of causes. That can be a vehicle running in an attached garage. You can get carbon monoxide inside the house from that. If you have a malfunctioning piece of heating equipment, that can cause carbon monoxide. If you have a blocked vent, that can cause carbon monoxide in the home. So that could either be in the winter, if you've got a vent on the outside and snow is covering the vent, the carbon monoxide can back into the house. Or if there's a problem with your chimney, that can also allow carbon monoxide to come back into the house. Sometimes we see carbon monoxide issues in a home during high wind events, because the wind is actually forcing what normally is going up through the chimney during the heating season back down in. So the products of combustion from the fireplace or the hot water heater or the HVAC equipment for the house gets forced back down in, and that causes carbon monoxide buildup. Which is why here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, since March of 2006, there is a requirement that you have carbon monoxide detection in your home on all habitable floor levels if you have a fossil fuel burning source in the home. So if you're an all-electric house, and there are still a couple all-electric residences here in Holliston, there are a couple condo buildings in town that are the same way. They're all electric. There's no source of carbon monoxide unless you have an attached garage. If you have an attached garage, then you would then need the carbon monoxide detection. But for most homes with gas or oil or propane for heat, you are required to have carbon monoxide detection. And you need to watch the expiration dates on those meters, those detectors. They expire 5 to 7 years, depending on the manufacturer. So make sure that you know where those are and how old they are as well, because if they need to be replaced, you should do it before there's a need. Occasionally we get calls for folks who say that there's a problem with their detector. We come out and either it's chirping because it's a low battery or it's an end-of-life chirp, or sometimes the detector is going off because it's just malfunctioning in general. We've seen, because what the detector is designed to detect, carbon monoxide, is in the same chemical spectrum as propane, heptane, methane. Folks who do a lot of crafts, if they're using a shellac, we've had this a couple times where people are gathered around the dining room table and they've been doing crafts for several hours, and they were using a shellac and the detector is plugged in the outlet just behind them. Sometimes they get a false reading. The detector, their $45 detector from Home Depot or Lowe's or our local Holliston hardware, thinks that there's carbon monoxide present, when in fact it's something with the same chemical signature as carbon monoxide, and the department's more expensive, more than $1,000 meter says, oh no, there's no carbon monoxide present. And then we sort of do our Sherlock Holmes impression, and we backtrack and we try and identify possible sources, and that's when we discover that, oh, they've been doing crafts for a while. Another way that I've seen a carbon monoxide detector go off over the years is when folks are not using the flame of their stovetop efficiently. I went one Thanksgiving night around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, where they had a big I would. It's bigger than pot. I would say they had a vat on the burner in the kitchen, and they were making turkey soup. But they had the flame very, very, very small because they were just simmering. Well, because carbon monoxide is the byproduct of incomplete combustion, because the flame was not burning efficiently, it was giving off carbon monoxide. And so as I walked me through your day, what have you been doing, and discovered that they had been simmering on the stovetop for several hours, we narrowed it down to the source was the range top. I've also seen it where folks may be warming up the stove just before the holidays, and it may be the first time they're using the stove since the last holiday, and maybe some of those drippings from the apple pie may have spilled onto the bottom of the stove, and then it's obstructing the orifice where the gas is coming up. And so because the flame isn't burning efficiently, because it's occluded either from food or some other accumulation, I've seen rust build up as well. So that can cause carbon monoxide. So yes, you definitely should be prepared for carbon monoxide. But again, as I was saying, since March of 2006, there is a requirement for most residences in Holliston to have carbon monoxide on each habitable floor level, and it should be changed, and the detector should be less than 5 to 7 years old. One more type of emergency that I'm surprised hasn't been mentioned, especially given that we've got places in this town that have names like Mudville.
Well, I was going to say temperature extremes, but I
Sure.
would say flooding.
Yes, thank you for picking up on my very, very subtle clue of flooding. Yes, flooding is a major problem, and I remember back in October of 2005, there was a rain event on Columbus Day weekend, which caused localized flooding in our community, and at one point there were more than 10 streets that were impassable because of the amount of flooding that was taking place. The streams and the bodies of water into which the streams fed just couldn't absorb any more water, and so they were overflowing their banks. At one point, Washington Street by Dunkin' Donuts was completely impassable due to the depth of water that was more powerful than the culvert that went out towards the pond out back. In fact, for several years after that, if you walked in the back door of the Dunkin' Donuts, you would have seen the green tight tank lifted up out of the ground, and that was caused by hydraulic pressure, where literally the groundwater had forced the tight tank up out of the ground because it used to be buried, and it was now sticking above ground. So yes, thank you for my shameless plug for flooding. We'll talk a little bit about what to do when the flood waters are rising. But temperature extremes, yes, absolutely. And here in New England, we see both temperature extremes. We see the very, very hot temperatures, and we see the very, very cold temperatures. And that then can coincide with some of those other issues that we addressed. So during the summer, brownouts or power outages can be associated with demand being so high in the New England region that some brownouts can occur, and then people can be without power, which then causes a secondary problem, because if they were using their air conditioning to keep themselves cool, and now their house is getting sweltering hot, and that may cause problems for them breathing or other health issues. On the other end of the extreme, during the winter, sometimes we lose power, and the house, which had been kept at a very comfortable temperature, now with the heating equipment not being on for an extended period of time, it can start to get colder and colder. And then the question is, how long can you stay? How long can you continue to layer? How long can you put on more blankets? Or when is it time for us to possibly think about going somewhere else? And that's where we as a community have to plan and figure out, when there's an emergency, should we be thinking about opening a cooling center? Should we be thinking about opening a warming center, depending on the time of year? And during widespread emergencies, should we be opening up a mass care shelter? I've been working for the town for 30 years. During my career, we have opened up a shelter in Holliston one time. And that was for a winter storm. And when we went through the process of mobilizing volunteers and assembling resources and making sure that we were all set to receive people, this many residents showed up. So the rule of thumb these days is whenever possible, we try not to open up a shelter in Holliston for a couple reasons. First of all, I've been involved as the emergency manager for the town. I've been working with emergency managers from throughout the region and throughout the state. I was part of a planning process. The state revised their mass care shelter plan a few years ago. And the focus of the state in recent years, recognizing that the trend that we observed was not unique. So what would happen is local municipality over here opens up a shelter, handful of people show up. Town right next to them opens up a shelter, handful of people show up. Another town 2 towns away opens up a shelter, just a few people turn up. They found that it's much more efficient now for us to use a regional planning model. So if there were a need in our region for there to be mass care and sheltering, the likelihood is that instead of opening a shelter here in Holliston, we would be suggesting that people who needed shelter go to a regional shelter. And so the state has now planned for regional shelters throughout the Commonwealth, and they have pre-identified locations. Oftentimes they are state facilities, which makes it a lot easier for them to take it over and to operate it. And so the plan would be that we would identify transportation gaps, and if people were having a hard time getting to that regional shelter, then we would try and use some of our transportation resources to help them get there. So you've been listening to me for a few minutes. Why do you think it is that when we opened up our shelter, only 2 people showed up?
They didn't know about it?
Possibly they didn't know about it. Why else?
Transportation?
Transportation sometimes is the issue. What's one of the characteristics of New Englanders?
Pride.
Pride. So I would take your pride and I would see you and I would say rugged individualism.
Oh, okay.
So we tend to be very independent. And so whether they knew about it and thought they didn't need it and somebody would need it more because they could just, put a couple more logs in the fireplace and keep part of their house warm, or possibly they had transportation gaps. And that's why we work very closely with the senior center, because by working with the outreach workers and the director and the assistant director, they know their clientele and they know who it is that in case of an emergency would really be at a disadvantage and wouldn't have the ability to get in their car and drive to a shelter in Framingham. So that's why it's important for us to have good networks. To address the issue of they didn't know about it, since that time we have instituted the Blackboard notification system. So the town does have an emergency notification system which can use emails, can use phone, or can use texting to let people know of important information, such as the power is going to be out, Eversource is anticipating that it's not going to be restored for 2 days. If you can go elsewhere, we'd encourage you to do that. Some people have signed up for the Blackboard Connect system, but every time I send out a notice, there are still a bunch of bounce backs that I get because people have changed their email address or they abandoned their landline and they're now only using their cell phone, which they haven't registered. But we try to communicate as best we can. So I can tell you that after Superstorm Sandy and after Irene, we used the Blackboard notification system a lot. Some of our communication was around the streets that would still be impassable, that Eversource was predicting it would be a couple days before power was restored, and then we also used that to communicate that the dump or the landfill on Marshall Street was going to be open extra for people who needed to dispose of forestry debris and other trees and branches that had come down in their yard. So communication is key, and so that's part of the town's plan to communicate is using Blackboard. We'll use the town's website, we'll use the Blackboard notification system. Depending on how large and widespread the issue is, we may need to use other media. HCAT is a great partner with us, and when there's something that needs to be communicated out, they can put that scrolling marquee across both platforms that they have in terms of whether you're a Verizon customer or you're an Xfinity customer. So we try to communicate as best we can. Transportation, that is, again, we work closely with the senior center, and they tend to know who it is that immediately comes to their mind if there's an incident that's happening, and they may want us to go and check on somebody ahead of time. And it could be that they are medically dependent, and they may have some either mobility issues, or they may have some health concerns such that they're on an oxygen concentrator, and they're concerned that if there's a power loss, that they only have a limited supply of oxygen tanks, which does bring up an interesting point as we talk about the power grid and the loss of electricity. There is a program that Eversource has which allows for priority restoration designation. And that is a form that your doctor can fill out where they can say and attest to the power company that you or someone in your home is on medically dependent equipment that is powered, and that as much as it's within their power, if they could restore your circuit early, that would be helpful. That's not a guarantee, and that list needs to be updated annually, and there is huge privacy concerns, and I don't have the ability, even as an emergency manager right now, to go in and run a report. I can't, ask the power company for the priority restoration customers in Holliston today. If Eversource were to declare a certain level of emergency based on an impending storm that they were facing, they would open up their portal, and one designee from the fire department and one designee from the police department would then have access to their portal. And at that moment, we would be able to see who the priority restoration customers were. And when there was an outage on that circuit, we would see estimated restoration times. But during a blue sky day like today, I don't have access to that information because it changes constantly. So if you or someone you know is in a position where they are dependent on technology to sustain their life and to keep them healthy, they should have a conversation with their doctor about whether or not it would be appropriate for them to fill out that paperwork with the power company. And again, that's done completely outside of us. We just only benefit from it if they're on the list at the time there's an emergency. So the town is able to designate to the utility company critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure is different from priority restoration, but as part of our emergency plan, we have already pre-identified key and critical infrastructure, places like water treatment facilities, police station, fire station, town hall, and we have also listed places like nursing home, group homes, because different places in town have different capabilities. The only nursing home, skilled nursing and rehab facility that we have in Holliston does have its own generator. So they should be able to be self-sufficient for a while. And so even if there's a power loss, they'll have some power capability. So they wouldn't be able to fill out the priority restoration form with the doctor because it's specific to an individual. So it can't be for an address like that has dozens of residents. It would need to be tied to a specific patient, and they wouldn't do it for a nursing home. But that's an excellent question. So again, as part of our plan ahead of time, we've identified areas that we are concerned about. So places like Mission Springs Housing for the Elderly, that's on our list of places to be concerned about. Cole Court, housing for the elderly. Again, it's a place where we know that there are going to be a lot of people who may have mobility issues, who may have additional health concerns, and may have a transportation gap. So those are the places that we, when there's a long-term emergency, are going to be reaching out to the folks that operate those facilities, check in with them, find out if they have any specific needs and if there are any resources that we can bring to bear for them. So again, a lot of what we do in terms of planning and in terms of responding to an emergency is relationship and planning ahead of time, making sure we know who the important players are. So that is one of the group homes that we have in town. So they are listed on our critical infrastructure, but they are a lower priority because they have fewer residents than, say, the skilled nursing and rehab facility out on Elm Street. But we do have a list of all the group homes in town. And again, if we know that there's going to be an extended outage, we'll reach out to the operators of the facility just to say, how you doing? Is there anything that you need? And oftentimes, whether it's the nursing home or whether it's these group homes, they're part of a larger network. You may remember last summer, there was an incident in, I want to say it was Sudbury, where there was a problem at a nursing home where there was flooding and there was a partial roof collapse, and they needed to evacuate close to 100 residents from the nursing home. And that sounds like a very big undertaking. Well, the nursing home has a plan. They're required by the Department of Public Health, which licenses them, to have an emergency plan. And so they have arrangements with other nursing homes, and they worked with the local fire department and the local transportation company to relocate close to 100 residents through various means, ambulances, buses, vans, and people got to where they needed to be. Only 3 of the residents ended up going to the hospital. The rest all went to other nursing homes, and that's a pre-planned thing. And I know our nursing home has a plan, and they exercise it regularly, and they know where they would be sending their patients if they needed to relocate from Elm Street. So places like group homes are required to have a plan, just like we're encouraging all of you to have a plan. And that's what we're here to talk about today is what should your plan include and what should you plan for? So part of my message to you is that you should plan to be self-sufficient for 48 to 72 hours. If we open up a shelter, you would need to bring some of the stuff with you to keep you sustained. You would not expect that we, as either a local government or a regional entity operating a shelter, would provide for all of your needs. So you would need to make sure that if you take medications regularly, that you know what those medications are, that you know the strength and the dosage, and that you have those available to be able to leave quickly and grab those. As one who's worked on the ambulance for many, many years, when I ask people if they're on any medications, sometimes they say yes. And when I ask them what they are, because I need to document it for our records, sometimes they'll tell me it's a little oval one, and it's off-white. And sometimes they'll tell me it's a round white one with an M on it. And so this is where it's really important. And I know the Senior Center has offered the File of Life for your refrigerator as an option. That's very handy to have that. Make sure you keep it up to date, though. That's why you should write in pencil, so that if you need to change your prescription or update it, that it has the most current information. So when you think about your preparedness, you need to think about your medications. Don't wait for the last day when your pill bottle is just about empty to refill your prescription. If at all possible, try and refill your prescription one of the first days that you become eligible. Oftentimes, insurance company won't let you do it more than 30 days out, or depending on whether you're on a 30, 60, or 90-day prescription. There are some limitations sometimes, but that way you'll have enough available, because if you're down to just one pill because you run it right down to the wire and then you get the prescription refilled just as the bottle is getting empty, think about the fact that maybe the pharmacy isn't going to be operating. Maybe they're not going to have power. Maybe they're not going to have power for a couple days. If the problem is isolated just to Holliston, you may be able to get the prescription transferred to another pharmacy from that same chain elsewhere in the region. But if it's a situation like Irene or Sandy, and you think of the pictures that you saw from Long Island and the utter devastation of entire neighborhoods and large sections of communities, chances are the pharmacy in Medway, Milford, or Ashland may not have power either. So this is why you need to make sure that you're prepared ahead of time to have the medications that you need. We highly recommend that you have a spare charger for your phone, because maybe your phone, you always charge your phone in the same spot, whether it's in the kitchen, whether it's in the bedroom, and when you need to leave in a hurry, maybe it's a brush fire that you need to evacuate for, maybe it's flooding. If you forget to grab that charger, and then the only way that you can charge is with your vehicle running in a car charger in the parking lot, that may not be a good option. So ahead of time, if you can obtain a spare charger for your phone, that's a good idea. Make sure that your plan also includes contact information. A lot of people don't know phone numbers anymore, because it's auto dial 2 on their phone, or they scroll through their cell phone and they bring up the contact based on the name. Well, if your cell phone's dead and there's no way for you to charge it, and you need to get a hold of someone, how are you going to reach them? Well, that's why it's important that part of your plan should include, and whether it's a 3x5 card or whether it's a they have formal sheets that you can fill out that include contact info, and you want to make sure that you've got contact info both for people locally as well as for people who are out of state. Somebody that, if there's an emergency in this area and locally people can't get a hold of you, but maybe you can get a message out, because oftentimes what happens when infrastructure is damaged, sometimes you can't make a voice call because the phone lines are all bogged down, but sometimes you can get an SMS message out. You can get a text message out. So if you can text that relative in Arizona, far, far away from our winter emergency, or our flooding, or whatever it is that we're dealing with, and you can send them a message that says, "I'm fine." And if everybody else in your family knows, if they can't get a hold of you, but they can get a hold of the relative in Arizona, and they can say, "Have they checked in with you?" And they can say, "Absolutely, they texted me at 10 o'clock this morning and said they're fine, they're in a shelter, or they went to a friend's house." And this is why it's important that you know phone numbers so that you can send messages if you need to. Going back to I believe the term that you used was pride, and which I characterized as rugged individualism. We're really very fortunate that we live in a community where we care and where people take care of each other. And it's very encouraging when there is a localized situation going on. I'll see some of the boards on social media when power is out in a particular neighborhood, and folks will be posting and saying, power out, anybody else? And a lot of people chime in and either say, yeah, we're out too, or a lot of people are saying, no, we've got power. And these spontaneous offers of assistance come up, and people say, we've got power over on such and such a street. If anybody needs to charge their phone, or they need, to take a hot shower, or, people are offering to help out neighbors. Our faith communities in this town and this area are very, very robust, and people from the religious communities will often help other people from their congregation. And so if they know that a particular neighborhood is impacted and that someone who is in a pew near them on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning or a Friday evening, depending on when services are held, they'll proactively reach out and say, just to let you know, I've got a spare bedroom. If you need a place to stay until power can be restored in your neighborhood, let us know. And I see that a lot with fires as well. When there is a fire and people are displaced, because oftentimes when there's a house fire, even if we limit it to just the room and the contents, oftentimes people are going to be displaced from their home for a while smoke removal occurs, while electrical is replaced that may have been melted. But neighbors are so generous. They open up their homes, they invite people in, and we saw this last November with the fire on Washington Street. People responded very generously to the GoFundMe, but even that day, people were offering to take in the family, they were offering to take in the animals. I know that yesterday there was a fire over the town line in Medway, and the family was displaced. And the question is this family going to be able to find alternate housing? Here's a little plug for you. I am not licensed to issue insurance advice, but I can tell you, based on my training and experience and working with people who've suffered a loss a lot over the years, check with your insurance company, find out whether you have alternate housing on your plan. While we're at it, I'll suggest you also look for rental on your auto policy. Both of them are key add-ons that not everybody gets, but that have a very good return on investment. For just a little bit extra in your annual premium, the insurance company, if you have alternate housing, if you are displaced due to a covered loss, they will provide either a set amount stipend to cover your alternate housing, or they will make all of the arrangements. And sometimes that means they bring a trailer that sits in your yard while your house is being renovated, or the floods are being abated, or the mold is being remediated, or whatever the issue is. Or sometimes they'll pay directly. They'll pay someone and they'll pay a monthly rental, or sometimes they'll pay for you to stay at an extended stay at a hotel or motel. So alternate housing is one thing. And then on the driving side, check and see if you've got rental. Again, very, very short investment, but when your vehicle is damaged and you need to be able to continue to get around, having the ability to have a rental car at your disposal that's paid for by the insurance company is a big bonus. And while we're talking about insurance, and sort of as an aside to flooding, if you have oil heat, check and see if you have the additional rider on an oil spill. Several times during the course of my career as fire chief, I have seen people who oil tank sprung a leak. It caused a mess in their basement, their garage, somewhere on their property, and not all of them had the rider for oil spill. So check ahead of time, because that cleanup can be tens of thousands of dollars. So we'll jump off of insurance now. We're talking about communications, making sure that you know who out of state you can check in with to let everybody know that you're okay, so folks can know to check in with that friend or relative. Make sure you've got phone numbers. Make sure your medication is prepared for. And again, be prepared to be self-sufficient for 2 to 3 days. If it's a large enough emergency to the point where FEMA is going to be coming in and setting up tent cities or large-scale mass care shelters, it's going to be a couple days before they show up. They're very good. They plan ahead. They can pre-mobilize resources. But in terms of long-term operations, and we saw this with the gas incident up in the Lawrence, North Andover a couple of years ago, that September, when those people were displaced from their homes for months at a time, it took a couple days before they were able to really set up the foundation for what would be a long-term sheltering operation. So you need to be prepared to be ready and take care of yourself for a couple days. To assist you with your personal preparedness and your family's preparedness, when you leave today, I am going to give you 3 things. I'm going to give you a brochure on preparedness for emergencies for older adults. That comes from FEMA. I'm going to give you a handout for what you should have in your emergency supplies. And everyone who showed up, who registered and came today, will also be receiving what we refer to as a Go Kit. Now, it's got some stuff in it already, but the expectation is that with the list that you have here, that you're going to be able to add extra stuff from your home. Again, this doesn't have your medication in it yet. So if you are watching on HCAT and you were not able to be live and in person at the Senior Center when this presentation was done, and you are interested in receiving a go bag for your household, and you are an older adult, please contact me at the fire station and I can try and make this available to you. These were acquired using grant funds, so they are available at no charge to older adults in Holliston.
Excuse me, what's in them?
I'm glad you asked. This is where we do the unveiling. But both of the pamphlets that I'm going to be handing out come from the Department of Homeland Security's website, ready.gov, and I will include a few links so that when HCAT does post-production, the link hopefully will appear somewhere beneath me here on the screen.
What about pets?
Pets. Oh, pets is a great... I will get to the unveiling here. Pets absolutely are something that you need to plan for, because just as you need to be sufficient, your animals need to be able to be sufficient as well. One of the challenges that they saw with the forced evacuations from both Katrina and Rita were that people were reluctant to go even when the evacuation order was given because they didn't want to leave their pets. So the requirement now for a mass care shelter is that they have to have a minimum capability to take not only people, but also their standard run-of-the-mill domestic animal. I give all those qualifiers because cats, dogs, good. Your birds, they're really not prepared to take your birds. Your gerbil, your hamster, your... there are a lot of things that they're not really equipped for. But obviously, if you've got a carrier that you can place your animal in, that helps to be able to not only transport it to the shelter or your friend's house, because again, if someone else has offered to let you in and stay with them for a little while, that's all the better. You'll be much more comfortable likely at their place than staying on a folding cot that the government would make available to you with a very thin blanket and a equally thin pillow. Not that I'm trying to tell you that we're not setting up a 5-star hotel, because it's not. So there's a requirement that for there to be a mass care shelter, that it needs to be able to accept regular domestic animals. And there will normally be a separate area for the animals. First of all, for allergy reasons, because some people are allergic to animals. So it wouldn't be good to have the pets co-located where other people are going to try and sleep. And then secondarily, it makes it easier in terms of cleanup and being able to manage the flow. So there will be a spot where you can go and you can let your animal out and you can walk it and you can clean up after it and you can dispose of certain matters. So if you've got an animal, you need to plan ahead. So you want to have, the ability to, as part of your go bag, you may have a little bit of pet food available, because if you're used to going to one of those large box stores and getting the 50-pound bag of food, you're not going to put the 50-pound bag in here. But maybe you're going to grab, you will have a couple Ziploc bags with a few days' supply of food available that can be placed in this, or a second bag, depending on how many supplies you need to prepare yourself with. So that's an excellent question. So what do we have in the bag that you are receiving free because this was provided with grant funds? You note the way I have to keep saying that, just to make sure that people understand that your local tax dollars were not used for this. So we've got some disposable wipes. We have a flashlight with batteries, because we may lose power. We've got a little bit of duct tape. Perhaps you need to tape over something or seal it. This is indicative of the society that we're living in today, but a mask, a little travel first aid kit, notepad. Looks to be a one-time use nightstick. You've got a pen. Looks like this is a pill minder, so that you can put the pills in for 7 days of the week.
Excuse me, what did you say, a one-time use of what?
It's a light stick, like a calulum stick. You break it and it's luminescent for 20 to 30 minutes. Oh, here's a handy item, a pocket radio, AM, FM, so that you can receive emergency information. Just keep digging down more and finding more things here. Hand sanitizer, again, reflective of the environment that we're operating in these days. Emergency drinking water. A polar fleece blanket. I believe this ends the... It is a good kit. And again, it's meant to just be a start. It's meant to be a springboard so that some of these things, which may be harder for you to go out and acquire, because of course it's hard for you to buy just one writing pad, whereas they can order cases of these and split them up and put them in individual bags. You're always looking for a flashlight when the power goes out, but you can never seem to find it. Or the one that you do find, the batteries are dead. So that is all the stuff that's in here. But this is just skimming the surface, because there's a very long list of things that are on what you should have on your basic emergency supply kit. So it talks about water. We've got that. It talks about extra battery for the cell phone or charger. It talks about a radio, flashlight and extra batteries, first aid kit. It suggests that we have a whistle to signal for help. There's no whistle in here. Dust mask, towelettes, can opener if the kit contains food. There's no food in this, but if you're going to be bringing food for your animal that needs a can opener, because it doesn't just have the peel lid. So once again, everyone who came today will receive one of these for your household at no charge. If you are watching on HCAT and you are part of the eligible catchment group, which is older adults, and you were unable to make it today, please contact me at the fire station, and we can try and get one of these to you while supplies last. And I will include links to the 2 pamphlets that we're handing out to those who attended today so that HCAT is able to provide those. So in terms of, yeah, emergency battery packs tend to be heavy because of the amount of power that they carry. So if you're looking to do something more than just the phone, then yeah, it's probably going to be somewhat heavy. The device that was mentioned from a particular manufacturer had a whole bunch of features, not only being able to power the phone, but it had another outlet. You could use it to jumpstart a vehicle. So that sounds a bit cumbersome. Honestly, if you're looking for a spare charger for your phone, you don't if it's going to be something that you may never use or just want to have in reserve in case there's an emergency, you may not need to go with the brand, the manufacturer specific one that may be very, very expensive, especially if you are using a device that may sound like a fruit. Sometimes those devices are, I don't want to use any specific brand names because I don't want anybody to be upset with me, but sometimes when you go to those stores where things are around $1 or now $1.25, sometimes you can find compatible phone chargers for much, much less. Just make sure you know which type of phone it is that you're trying to charge, but rather than paying dozens of dollars for a spare charger that you may never use, if you can get a compatible one at, say, an Ocean State job lot or another local store and save some money. Because again, we don't want preparedness to be cost prohibitive for you. We want you to be able to be self-sufficient, but you shouldn't have to invest, hopefully, hundreds of dollars. I watched one video on emergency preparedness and the Go kit that they were making. They were putting into a very large plastic tote, similar to what you might put all of the decorations from the holidays in the winter in and put up in the attic. And I'm thinking, in case of emergency, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to grab a big tote like that and lug it out to the car, especially if we've got black ice, depending on if it's a winter storm situation. So that's why, a nice little backpack like this, and there are more pockets and capacity in this other than what I showed you. Or you may have this as one go bag, and you may have a second spare backpack that maybe has the supplies for the animals and maybe your medications and maybe some key documents that you want to have a copy of. I'll tell you, whether it was after the fire on Washington Street or whether it's after other natural disasters, vital records, things like a copy of your birth certificate, things like a copy of your Social Security card that you're going to need to be able to apply for benefits, a copy of your insurance policy with your policy number, with the name of your insurance company, those things that tend not to change a lot. Have a copy of that in one of the pockets in your bag so that if you suddenly find yourself at a mass care shelter and FEMA has opened up a disaster recovery center because there was a major storm declaration for all of Massachusetts or all of Middlesex County, and you need to know what is or isn't covered under my insurance policy, having a copy of it and having contact info is very, very helpful. So the question was, based on my networking with other emergency planners from across the country, places where there are more emergencies and more need to evacuate, how many have go bags? Most of them. It is very much a part of their culture. And it's almost like when a family is expecting a baby and they've got the go bag to be able to head to the hospital. It is ingrained in their consciousness. So if you're in an area that's prone to wildfires, like out west, or you're in an area which is in a flood inundation area, possibly down in Louisiana, if you're in a place where you have a certain type of emergency that you experience multiple times in your lifetime, they tend to have go bags more readily available. It's not part of our culture because, again, low frequency events for us. Again, In 30 years, we've had to open up a shelter locally once. It doesn't happen a lot where we're asking people to relocate on a moment's notice. Usually you've got time to prepare, but even then, you're scurrying around and you're trying to grab things, so it's good to have a list so that you remember, because if you're not going to be able to re-enter your home for a couple days, to make sure that you've got what you need to be self-sufficient for several days.
Excuse me, how
It's not too heavy right now. If you start to put more stuff like cans of cat food or other things, you may find that it's becoming too heavy, in which case we recommend, again, having 2 separate bags so that you can keep them light and you can distribute the weight. And you may decide that you don't want to keep all the things in here, and you may take out something that may be a little bit heavier. Thank you all for coming.